Hello, my chicklets. Thank you for stopping by. Today we will be reading The King and a Snake, a story written by myself, artwork done by Winstermagic on Wattpad, information in the description. All of the sides had some control over the imagination. It was a tool they could use to help them refocus on tasks or distract themselves from truths that were too hard to handle for the time being. Sure, the imagination had become a theater and a courtroom for their videos, but the sides used it for so much more. Logan would use the imagination as a library, gaining access to every book that Thomas had ever read. It was a calm place where silence was mandatory, and he allowed himself to slip into the indulgence of reading. Patton and Virgil would often go to a park, spending time enjoying the shade of the trees or the squeaky swing sets. Roman and Remus were constantly changing what they did in the imagination, and Deceit would use the imagination to rehearse scenarios or practice his lying. At least, that's what everyone thought. The truth was, when Janus opened the door to the imagination, it almost always opened to a small castle with cartoonish details and an impractical layout. The imagination never forgot a scene when it was conjured, and though this castle had been created when they had all been very young, Janus couldn't seem to let it go. He came to this place to remember a time when things were easier, when there were no dark and light sides, when they were all just sides. His steps echoed through empty halls long forgotten by Patton, who loved to play hide-and-seek here. His eyes wandered over games and toys long abandoned by Logan, who no longer needed to be stimulated by trivial things. He heard the rustling of drawings, still scattered on the floor from the day creativity split. Each step was a memory that Janus clung to, each piece and history he still adored. But today he was looking for something specific. His echoing footsteps finally stopped as he looked up at a throne still perfect and pristine, as there was no dust in the imagination unless you willed it. Holding out his hand, Janus forced the room to rewind, showing him the memory he wanted to remember. Look at what I can do! They were all so young back then, and creativity was still one. His outfit was black and white with intricate designs that were sometimes colored but often blank. It was a testament to all of the things he could be. In his hands was a snake that he had created, his first ever animal creation. Janus, the passive observer, watched with a nostalgic smile. "It's so real," the little morality called as he cowered behind logic. "I want to see if I can make it bigger." "Creativity, please be careful. Though we are just Logan frowned, trying to remember the word. "We aren't real. I don't know what will happen if we get hurt." "You're too cautious, Logic." He began channeling his creative energy, and Janus, the real Janus, heard someone walking up behind him. "That's the day we created the Dragon Witch." Patton was so furious. I think that's when the split really started to happen. "Roman, Remus, what are you doing here?" "Not quite." Deceit turned around, and he wished he had a better poker face. The surprise was written in his scales. "Creativity?" Standing before him was a monochromatic side, a gray coat with a black and white sash. His crown sat lopsided on his head, and his eyes were constantly changing hues. "I didn't expect to find you in my old castle, but it makes sense why things are always a little bit off when I come in here." "Creativity, how is this possible? Since when did you stop calling me king?" He smiled and shrugged. "Remus and Roman will occasionally feel the need to be complete. So, for a short amount of time, until the two start arguing again, I am me." He rubbed the back of his head. It wasn't the easiest thing to explain, but if anyone could understand, it was deceit. Normally, the deceptive side would sneer and make a snide comment or a sarcastic joke, but no words came out of his mouth as his jaw hung. There was a moment of pure silence until his feet began taking him towards a friend he hadn't seen in years. He broke into a sprint and wrapped his arms around Creativity. "You idiot, King! How could you leave me with those thick-headed cretins? I knew you could manage, and I also didn't have much of a choice. You know that." It didn't matter what body Creativity had. He was always strong, and Janus tried not to completely melt in his arms as they were wrapped tightly around him. Besides, you've done well for yourself, finally getting the chance to reveal yourself as a side despite the years of having to hide. Protecting Thomas, I'm so proud of you. Despite losing you, I think I've done excellently, he hissed, but his face melted into a small smile. The twins haven't done a bad job either. Do you have their memories? I do, but I get to see them from a different perspective. Speaking of which, Creativity leaned his lips to Janus's ear. I have an important question for you, and don't try lying to me. This is my realm. I'll know. He tucked a hand under Deceit's chin, forcing their eyes to meet. Do you have a thing for me? For us? Why would you think something like that? He attempted to pull away. Deceit did not like to be seen as the weak link in any conversation, but especially not a conversation this personal. For the second time today, he found himself wishing for a better poker face, as a light dusting of red covered the human side of his face. That isn't an answer, Deceit. You know me well enough to know that that is the only answer you're going to get. Creativity's smirk grew with that answer. He wasn't planning on letting Deceit go anytime soon. You're lucky I have more control of myself than Remus does. Though, if this turns out well, you are going to have to adjust to his lack of restraint. Creativity leaned in, his lips a whisper away from Janus's. Stop me at any time, darling. Your comfort is my utmost importance. Then he leaned in for a soft and tender kiss. Janus kissed back immediately. No thoughts, no hesitation. He'd wanted this for a while. He knew he would have to think this over properly when all was said and done, but for now, he enjoyed his moment of weakness. Sure, he had an interest in Remus and in Roman. Both had aspects that he adored, but he had never been ready to admit it to either of them. It was much easier to push those feelings aside because one without the other felt incomplete, and Janus had thought they weren't on good terms. Knowing that the two still occasionally longed for the feeling of being one Creativity made their feud seem childish and easy to overcome. Janus had a lot to think about, but for now, he enjoyed this moment, this new memory. Does that mean you love me? Janus nodded slowly, rolling his eyes at Creativity's happy smirk. Of course he did. He loved Creativity since he was a kid, and that didn't change just because the one became two. Looks like I'll have even more of a reason to be like this. He laced his fingers with Janus's, gently running a hand over the snake scales that littered his face. You know, we might have to figure out a schedule to share. I think I might be able to come out and play more often, but Roman and Remus are already having a hard time playing nice when it comes to you. Janus rolled his eyes. I've always been a fan of first come, first serve. Be careful what you ask for. He gave Janus another quick kiss before he began to split. Janus was sad to see him go, but it was nice to know his friend wasn't gone forever. Mine! He heard Remus shout before he felt himself being pulled out of the imagination. This certainly was going to make things more interesting in the Mind Palace, but for once in a long time, Janus was ready for change. Thank you again for listening. This was The King and a Snake, a story written by myself. Information for the story and the artist is in the description, as well as links to my other social media. I hope you all have a wonderful day.